Hi, and welcome to a new video of this MOOC. In this video, we are going to continue with the implementation of our tic-tac-toe simple page application. We are going to introduce a new feature that consists on allowing the user to introduce the player name when starting a new game. Thus, we will be able to show a welcome message as the one you can see here, including the name of the player. When continuing a new and already started game, the information about the player name will be included in the object we receive from the backend service. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to, as always, we need to use forms in our Angular applications to import the forms module in the corresponding module, in this case the game module. Then I will add a new property to the state object in order to save the player name. Then I will modify the header component in order to show the welcome message we have just seen in the example. Okay, so let's modify the game module in order to import the forms module. Import forms module, in this case from Angular forms library, and of course I have to include it in the imports array I have here, so forms module. With this I can start using forms in my application. Now I'm going to modify the state service in order to include the new property in the state that is called player name, and that is of type string. But I have also to include it here in the constructor with an empty value for the default state of the application. So I will have here player name and an empty value, and also I need to include the default value when resetting the state of the application. Okay, now I'm going to modify the header in order to show the welcome message. So in the template, I take the opportunity here to modify the message we already have, because now we need two headers. So I will have a header tag here, and inside it I will have the message with the turn as I had before. But now I'm going to include a new H3 header with the welcome message. So I will write here welcome, and using interpolation I will include the value of this player name. As always, I will include it subscribing using the assign pipe to the corresponding property, in this case the player name property. Okay, so every time the state change, as I'm subscribing it to the state observable with the async pipe, I will update here the name of the player. Okay, if I go to the application, of course, when I go to new game, the value of the player name is empty because I have not included yet the form in order to set it. But when I continue a game, as the information is included in the object I receive from the server, I have here the value, in this case, that is Enrique. I'm going to include here an space, welcome, and here an space in order to put here better. And with this, I have already created the property in the state property, in the state of the application. Now I'm going to implement the logic in order to allow the introduction of the player name using a form in game component. In order to do that, I will include a local property in game component in order to save the player name, and a method that will be called when the user clicks on the submit button of the form, and that will update the player name in the state service of the application. Of course, then I need to modify the view in order to show the form and allow the user to introduce the player name. This form will be shown only when the player name property of the state service is empty, and on the other hand, when this property is not empty, I will render the game with the header and the board. Okay, so let's start with this part, and the first thing I have to do is here in the game component to include the local property that will save the player name. So private player name of type string, and at the beginning the default value is an empty string. Now I'm going to create here a handle submit click method, and here I have to update the player name property in the state service. So I need to have a local property here with the state service. So state service of type state service, and in the constructor I have to assign the local state service to the one I have injected here in the constructor. Okay, now I can here set this dot state service dot state dot player name property to the local one, this dot player name. Okay, now I have to modify the template in order to include the form, but I will just render the form if the value of the player name in the state service is empty. So here I have to discriminate between two situations. If I have the player name property empty, I will render the form, and if not, I will render the header and the board as before. Okay, so I'm going to here include two ngIf directives in order to discriminate these situations. Sorry, ngIf, and here I'm going to check the value. In order to check the value, I have to subscribe, of course, to the state observable. So state service dot state with the dollar, because it's the observable, with the async pipe I subscribe to the value, and I access here the player name property. If this value is an empty string, I will render the form, and if this value is not an empty string, I will render, if not an empty string, I will render the header and the board. Okay, so now I have to implement the form with a label in order to give an instruction to the user, introduce player name. Now an input for introducing the player name. So I have to use here a two-way binding that will be linked to the property player name. This is an input of type of text type, and the name is the same one, for instance, player name. Now I have to include a button. In this case, I will have a click binding to bind the click on this button to the handle submit click function I just implemented. So I put it here, and in this case, this is a submit input, and the value is submit. So that's all. As you can see here, when the status of the request is success, I will check the value of the player name property of the state service, of the observable of the state service. If this is an empty string, I will render the form. If this is not an empty string, I will render the game. Okay, so let's check if this is working. As you can see, when I click on home, of course I get the welcome message. When I click on new game, I can introduce here a name, Pepe, and clicking on submit, I render the game and I can start playing with the welcome message, welcome Pepe. If I click on continue, I'm retrieving the information from the backend service and I render the welcome message, in this case with the value I have received from the backend service. And again, I can start or continue, in this case, playing. Okay, so that's all for the implementation of the player name form. And that's all for this video. See you in the next one. Bye.